Good afternoon. Welcome to the briefing on the third day of the meeting on protection of minors in the church. As you can see, today I'm here speaking from the podium, but I'm happy to have given up my chair so that we can have more participants from the meeting sharing their thoughts and answers. I think that you will appreciate. Today, you see, we have three continents represented here at the table of rapporteurs. Their presence here underlines the need for a global response to a global problem as terrible as is the abuse of minors. And this is what Francis is asking of us, a global response. I will not repeat the modality and timing of the briefing. I'm sure that now you are well acquainted with the modality and timing. So today we have with us Cardinal Rainer Marx, Monsignor Charles Scicluna, Padre Arturo Sosa, Sister Veronica Penibo, and Father Federico Lombardi and Paolo Ruffini. So I don't need to make much more presentation because I think that every person is well known. Come sempre abbiamo fatto.
As we've done on previous day, we give the floor first of all to the speakers so that they can underscore some points that maybe you didn't see in the live broadcast, but I think that you have been able to see a great deal. But I'd like to ask Father Lombardi to give us some thoughts. Thank you, Alessandro. Very briefly, the first point has to do with the testimony provided by the lady who spoke yesterday evening. You have been given the document. We experienced her testimony in the hall. I have to say that it was probably the most intense moment in the meeting so far. Very strong impression, and once again, and even more, this has helped me understand how this listening, personal listening in an atmosphere of respect and openness to listening does achieve great results. I think that if we have made some progress in this meeting, this occasion has been a very significant step forward because it has affected everyone and all the efforts we make to hear and take into account many different aspects. But I have to say that the context of that testimony to me was much stronger, much deeper than many other forms of meeting and of listening to people who need to be respected, who have suffered a lot. But it was also the whole context that made its mark. A second remark refers to women. As of yesterday afternoon, we heard a lady, Mrs. Ghisoni, who is here with us, and as you have heard, the Pope himself insisted on commenting on the strength of this testimony this morning. You saw Sister Veronica, so I don't need to describe the authoritative way in which she presented her testimony as an African woman, something that is extremely valuable in the framework of our meeting, where we have many African participants. And this afternoon we will have Valentina, so I'm sure that we will be taking a third step as the corpus of all participants. We shall be analyzing also the contribution that women can offer and must offer in this regard within the Church. On Sister Veronica, later the Pope said, well, she's really very effective. That's in the way he says things. But he too has clearly fully understood the importance of this testimony. The second remark refers to the process, the path where many of those who are rapporteurs for the working group, and I was told this morning, it's incredible how in just over 2 days so far I have noticed within the group I belong to, which is a very good dynamics, there is an ongoing process and the mindset of people is changing. So, in spite of the fact that the meeting is very short, this is a process that participants are experiencing as a positive move forward. Then there is a cardinal who has been a cardinal for a long time. He's taken part in synods and all sorts of meetings over the past decades, and he was saying, do you know that we've really come a very long way, because the kind of communication we have in this meeting in terms of openness and honesty of the things that are said, but also in terms of relations with the outside world, relations established through the different forms of communication with the media, everything has really moved forward significantly compared to synods of, let's say, 15 years ago. So this is a process, a development also in the way in which we experience these church events. Fourth comment, the follow-up. I would like to ask the rapporteurs of the working groups, I will ask them to send me their reports, because there's a great wealth that is presented almost symbolically in the evening in the hall. And this evening we won't even have this because we have the penitential liturgy. So there's a great wealth of contributions that is added on to the great wealth already mentioned by Zollner in terms of the replies to the questionnaire. So I realize that we cannot then simply close this chapter tomorrow evening. A phase will end, but the in-depth study, the work, the understanding of all the wealth of contributions we have received will require some time, and we shall have to take care in finding the right ways of making best use of all this. I give the floor to Paolo Ruffini to give us some additional indication. As on previous days, I will try to describe what has happened on the basis of the reports presented in the language groups, the main concepts that have been discussed in the working groups. We've said that it has been said that this meeting can be a positive event in the fight against abuse and in the protection of minors. During the discussion, a proposal was made to establish an hour in all the dioceses to ask for forgiveness all over the world in order to encourage and raise awareness that wounding children is wounding God. It's a matter of establishing proper relations with the victims, even with the victims who have a negative attitude towards the church and who identify the church with those who have not protected them or has protected perpetrators. Pastoral care for families of victims is very important. Families that have been devastated by these abuses, the importance of listening on the part of bishops. Listening has to become structural throughout the church. Other key concepts that have been repeated. The crisis can contribute to changing the way of being a church, moving from the collegiality of the bishops, but synodality of all of God's people. Synodality must always exist, not only when there is a crisis and not only in order to solve a problem. Collegiality amongst the bishops must become stronger, and also with the superiors of religious orders. How this should be implemented in terms also of sharing resources and also human resources, and how to implement collegiality and synodality through subsidiarity and decentralization, and how to work with the countries that have not yet started to follow protocols to safeguard the minors, such as through the twinning of dioceses. It's a matter of supporting a change of mindset in terms of the full responsibility of bishops within the framework of synodality. So the role of the lay was also widely discussed, the role of women, the role of families. It has been said that the crisis of the family affects the development of the young, those who will then form other families, but also there will be those who feel a calling to priesthood, but maybe they conceal their fragility. Pornography is a scourge of society. It hinders even the emotional development of the young, and it's increasingly necessary to develop ways of accompanying those who become victims of this. And it has been said also how marriage in itself is not an antidote, it's not a solution to sexuality based on lust, and this affects the calling to form a family, but also the calling to priesthood. Marriage is not an antidote to lust. So the formation of priests was discussed, and the formation of seminarians, and the minor seminaries were also discussed, whether they still are meaningful in the training of priests, or maybe they are just training schools. The involvement of the lay, both men and women, was discussed, and spouses in selection and formation. The importance of psychological tests was underscored, because they can examine the level of maturity and the role of couples in premarital formation, but also in connection with the training for priesthood and the selection of seminarians. Christian families can help the church. The importance of moral theology and bioethics was underscored, and how it is possible also to involve expert lay persons in these activities. Seminaries should not accept candidates who have been rejected by a different one, and also the possibility was discussed of setting up independent committees made up of religious persons and lay persons, and they can examine cases of misconduct, and also the possibility of forming commissions, groups of lay experts was discussed, and involving them in also decision making. The lay should be involved in the formation of seminarians, and decentralization from Rome towards the episcopal conferences should be considered, and the accountability not just of the bishops, but also of religious superiors. The cultural differences between countries were discussed. The culture of secrecy in some countries makes some subjects taboo, and the role of the lay in some cases is not recognized by the people, the lay themselves, or by the civil authorities in some countries. The crisis of the family has been indicated as a cause for emotional immaturity. Individualism is the primary cause and a root of clericalism, and a community as a fundamental element in priesthood that should never be solitary, because this would entail the risk of thinking that what characterizes it is the solitary exercise of power, which instead should be a service to the community. It has also been said that the question of responsibility doesn't apply just to the clergy or the bishops, but all of God's people involved in encouraging a culture that can help prevent abuses and to protect minors. And the minors must always be protected from any kind of abuse. Thank you, Mr. Augustinian.
Yeah, a moving moment, I think a moving one with the victims of abuse, and it's a powerful message. So I would like to ask you if you can share your impression on this meeting and on the meeting on the protection of minors. As I told you, you can speak in your mother language.
Also, ich spreche in Deutsch.
I will speak in German. Unfortunately, I cannot do it during the meeting, but at least I can do this at this press conference. I will take advantage of this opportunity. This morning, a bishop asked me, but was it necessary to organize a meeting such as this one? Did this make sense? Was it necessary? So we exchanged views and opinions, and as we reach the end of the meeting, I think that most of the participants do agree that what has taken place has been a very important discussion. We have talked to each other in a way that, quite honestly, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have dreamed of. We have, in some countries, worked in different ways at different levels, not only in the field of abuse against minors, but hearing also the Holy Father and also in talking with him in our private meetings, I think that everyone realizes now that everyone needs to take on responsibility. It is a joint responsibility. It's not something that involves single countries or cultures, but it is a shared responsibility. And I really do think that this is now a fact, and nobody questions it. Clearly, different views have been presented, but in a way, everyone has acknowledged that the common denominator is this problem. Now, this is significant. If we look at a world that is so multifaceted, multicultural, and it's very difficult to find shared beliefs. This is one point I'd like to share with you. Naturally, I was involved in organizing the testimonies of survivors in Germany. I had already thought of organizing something similar, and consequently I was able to participate and meet for an hour and a half with some representatives of victims, but also with the organizers. There's just one point I'd like to underline and like to share with you, because it is important for all of us. It has been said that there's a great deal of talk in the church, but then what happens in practice? And unfortunately, I need to admit that these associations, more often than not, are right. And this is why meetings such as the one that is taking place is only one step. We haven't reached the final stretch. We have not yet made any decisions. It's premature. Many people ask me, as Father Lombardi was talking about the follow-up. So what will the repercussions be? How shall we continue to move forward? Everyone knows that we shall continue to move forward. We cannot simply close the meeting and the matter after these 3 days. It's important to find a pathway so that we can bring together all the many documents, all the many ideas. Mr. Ruffini has mentioned a number of points. These are not decisions, but these are simply ideas that will then have to be translated. And I will try, and I do expect the support of the Holy See, because at the end of my presentation, I said we have different responsibilities. As a bishop, I know that I have been strengthened in my responsibilities. In Germany, a great deal has been done, but new points have been discussed in this summit, and so I have been assigned new responsibilities in my diocese and the whole of Germany. Over the next few weeks in the Roman Curia, we shall be discussing different matters to modify the structure, the organizations. My main point is how then shall we succeed in putting into practice what has been so clearly discussed, what is contained in excellent documents of the Church, so that these are not just words, but that they are truly translated into practice. So how can we support each other? Not just in making appeals, but rather in verifying and monitoring. In our working group, we were particularly impressed because some participants every 3 years do a monitoring exercise. It's as if the dioceses were certified and they would to ensure that they are doing what is indicated in the guidelines. We wish to put into practice, not just in the German Episcopal Conference, these aspects, but all over the world. This has been just very important. You have heard the presentations, so just consider the openness and the willingness to accept change. This has been proven in the summit. In fact, it is really impressive. I've been a priest for 40 years, a bishop for 25 years, so I do have some experience with synods, and I think that great progress has been made also in the culture of dialogue, the culture of the Church's openness, the fact that we are discussing critical issues, full knowing that we don't all share the same views, but we do speak openly of very difficult themes. The final point, maybe this is also a test. Just how we confront such a terrible issue, so widespread. If we do succeed, we are making some progress, but we can't deny that we have had some successes in recent years, and I really think this is a very positive step forward. So, to go back to the bishops this morning, I think that this is a good step forward. Not just the way we've talked, but what we've talked about as a participant. And with my own responsibilities, I will be focusing on the follow-up. I want to see words translated into facts. And the next conference shouldn't take place in 5 years' time, but much sooner. Thank you, Cardinal Marx. And now, Father Arturo Sosa will have to speak in Spanish. I would like to simply tell you how I have, what has been my impression of this meeting. We have so many participants, and I've attended the meeting with a great deal of hope. It's different to just sit back and wait. Hope is something different. With hope, we want to act, so that we are able to achieve what we wish to achieve. In the Church, we have so many children, vulnerable people. These people must be able to live in peace. Before speaking more in depth, I wanted to say that all the religious men and women have expressed very clearly our confusion, our shame before these abuses that have involved these vulnerable people, children. We want to express our hope as to the outcome of this meeting, this new stimulus provided by this meeting. Above all, focusing on survivors who wish to heal, there needs to be justice. Reparation must be made. We need to set up these structures for accountability. People need to be accountable for what they do, and we need to avoid the culture of silence. We acknowledge that we have not always reacted in the most appropriate manner, and we ask for forgiveness for the mistakes that have been made, and we shall undertake to do all that is possible in order to give an answer to Pope Francis's request for the Church to move forward, incredibly consistently seeking to heal the evil that has been committed. And we need also to listen more and more to these cries for help. Undoubtedly, in this meeting, very clear, evident steps forward have been made. It is a meeting that has focused its attention on one issue, a very complex issue. And over these past days, we have talked about how we can implement this protection for minors. And I think that we are all aware of the importance of acknowledging the truth, of saying the whole truth, bringing to the light the truth about all these abuses, and this in itself is a great step forward. We talk about freedom and a willingness. We need to accept a reality as it is. There are abuses, but we also need to examine matters in depth. We need to understand why this happened and to identify the causes in order to identify remedies, because if we don't know what the causes are, then we cannot develop a short, medium, or long-term strategy. Because this is certainly not an issue that can be resolved overnight. So this has been is a multicultural meeting, a universal meeting, and cultural differences cannot be a justification to justify situations of abuse. Culture at times can be opaque, vague, but this should not be the case. We need to follow the gospel that tells us that we must bring to light all the facts, all the causes, so that we can contribute to healing, to redemption. The Church, as a universal body, can move forward in this direction. The Church as a multicultural body that is incarnate in the light of the gospel, we want to bring into the light this truth that can free us. So we accept the challenge. It is a channel because we need to accompany all the children of the Church towards emotional maturity. If we are not mature from the emotional standpoint, we all, as representative of the Church, the Pope, religious ministers, the lay, all of us, we need to achieve this emotional maturity that enables us to have healthy relationships and safe, balanced relationships. And therefore, we need to focus our attention on training programs of formation, the formation of the ordained, those who are preparing for ministry, preparing to be ordained, but also for people who are to be baptized, so that this emotional maturity can be distinctive to our Church. As the body of Christ, we a wounded body now, wounded by the injustice in the world, but wounded also by our own sins, the sins that have taken place within the church. And so we need to help ourselves with the faith, with resurrection. We must not move backwards. We know that it's a matter of not returning to life, but having the life that God gives us through the resurrection. And so I'm experiencing a transformation process, a move towards these wounds, the wounds that cause death in all the different senses, the wounds of abuse. We're moving towards a new life, a life of resurrection, a reconciled life. This is how I've been living through this meeting, this experience, and growth in the awareness that we all walk together. This gives us oxygen, this process, this shared process with the lay, the religious, an experience of communio for all of us, the entire body of the church. As the Holy Father Pope Francis said, yes, the church is bride, mother who gives us life, so a move towards the collegiality of the bishops, the Pope, who somehow is stimulating the church that it will be God's people marching.
Your intervention has impressed the Holy Father, so I invite you to share your impression on this morning and on this meeting. Thank you.
Is it on? Okay. In my culture, we say, good afternoon. We have to greet. And you have not allowed me to speak in my language, but maybe...
Next time, so German is welcome. You can say the name of your language, your mother language.
Maybe another time. I think I want to begin by saying something that happened here. I came here, and my name was right at the end. But I was hearing from my brothers that, she can't be at the end. That's a move, isn't it? Because in the past, all the bishops will finish, all the priests will finish, the sisters are at the bottom. But we thank God. I'm just trying to say to you that something happened in that hall. Yesterday, when we listened to the testimony of the lady that spoke, something happened. It was like we witnessed what she experienced. And for me, it was courageous of her to come out to say what she experienced. At the same time, I feel that, and I said it in the hall this morning, that we are all part of it. Even those of us who are saying, crucify them, do this, do that, we are part of it. Because some of us witnessed some of those things, but didn't have the courage to talk. We have to say mea culpa. I have to say it. But one thing that encouraged me yesterday was the talk about collegiality, but then synodality. Yes, the bishops will work together because the buck stops with them. But all of us, lay people, priests and religious, with the bishop, must work together to bring this to a final stop. I'm not saying it will stop completely, because I know from human experience that unless we do something concrete, we will still have such things. How do we protect our young ones? And not just our young ones, the vulnerable. How do we make sure that we don't have recurrence of the things that we are so ashamed of today? But in that hall, what I found is the capacity to listen to empathize, to sympathize, and to say, we must do something. And I know in my group, there was so much that we shared that we say, this we have to do together. As a church, we are people of the resurrection, people of hope. And we must bring that hope to everyone. Not just those of us here, but all of us in this room. We must be people of hope. And how do we do that? We want to find out, and we are trying to do it. How can the church be very active in protecting children, in having committed plans that we will all commit to make sure that our young ones are safe? Not just young ones, the vulnerable. There are other issues in the church, as some people have said, and it's being looked into. But this time, the issue of the sexual abuse of minor is the one at the table. And for me, sexual abuse of minor is not just for boys, it's also for girls. And we are looking at it. And hopefully, the final declaration, the final write-up will actually address what the church will be doing step by step, so that we will never have this shameful, disgraceful issue to happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Veronica. And now, Monsignor Shikluna, please. Thank you.
Well, I will not try to speak Maltese, because that would be also another challenge, not only Uribu. What do I bring from the last 24 hours? First of all, an extraordinary witness of women, which moved the Holy Father, but I would say most of us, starting from the beautiful testimony and the extraordinary talk by Dottoressa Ghisoni and also yourself, Sister Veronica, this morning. You bring a wisdom that we need. And I would like to mention also the person who shared her extraordinary but narrative with us yesterday. A lady who suffered so much at the hand of a priest, and that with her narrative changed our heart, transformed our hearts. And so this has been an extraordinary 24 hours, because with this experience of what the Holy Father says, il genio femminile in Italian, this extraordinary contribution that women bring to the church. The Holy Father kept saying, but the church is a lady, she è una femmina, una madre, una donna. And we are at the service of so many people who have so much wisdom that we can learn from. I was struck by the two interventions this morning, Sister Veronica remarks, because they were talking about the need of transparency, the definitive movement toward what I have called a culture of disclosure. But one of the main problems I find, and this is something we need to work on, we don't only have problems of transparency ad extra, that is, when we interface with society or with civil authorities, but even within the same communion of the church. Dioceses don't talk to dioceses, religious orders don't talk to dioceses. We need transparency, communion, sharing of vital information within the church. I would say also within the process itself, canonical procedures, there needs to be more communication with the victims who are impacted by what is happening. And I've already had the opportunity to comment on this. I feel that the victims are not informed about the outcome of church procedures. They have no say, and they are the ones impacted and they're heard as witnesses, and that's all. I think they have a role to play, and it has to have a standing which I think needs to be developed. We talked about the question of pontifical secrecy, and there is a movement within the aula to move forward on this issue, not to bind these procedures with a top-heavy element of confidentiality. I think there is a level of confidentiality that civil procedure, a normal canonical procedure guarantee that would be enough to guarantee the dignity of the people concerned, the good name of people because of the presumption of innocence, but there is no need for this top-heavy ancient institute, which at times is the butt of so many jokes, as you know. But I'm really grateful for the experience within the groups. I've been able to participate in one of the groups, and as Father Lombardi says, there has been also a pilgrimage together within the groups, people sharing their experiences and wanting to know more, learning from each other, because we come from different languages, but also from different points of the globe. And I think that we are really growing together, and this is, I would like to end and conclude, I would like to thank so many people who have promised their prayers and are accompanying us by prayer. At the end of the day, the Pope mentioned prayer as one of the more important aspects of we need to pray because we need all the Lord's help to get it right. And I think prayer is also finding ourselves with humility before the Lord who saves us, asking forgiveness, but also the strength to be good stewards together. Not only collegially, as Sister Veronica so rightly emphasized, but also as pilgrims walking together, because that is the heart and essence of a synodos, being pilgrims together.
Thank you. So we're now open to questions. Please, we have a shorter time than yesterday, so please, brief one, and each one of you, one question at a time. So, Christopher Lamb.
Christopher Lamb from the Tablet. My question is about religious orders. We've seen in the Church some of the worst cases of abuse have occurred within religious orders, such as the Legionaries of Christ and others. One of the problems has been is that religious orders have had a semi-autonomous structure at times. We've seen in England and Wales a case of a monastery, Ampleforth, where they completely opted out of child protection whilst terrible abuse was going on. And their Benedictine order had also signed into these protections, but they hadn't. What is your message to the religious orders, and in particular someone like Ampleforth? And my question is for Archbishop Scicluna and anyone else who would like to take it.
Well, we have the general of the greatest, one of the greatest orders here, and a religious. I was sort of that was going to get out free, scot-free. My take on it, but I will leave something, of course, for the two religious, and of course we have Padre Lombardi as well. Let me call about our own experience in Malta, because I was talking to Cardinal Nichols about this as well. We are very grateful because religious orders on our island, and we have religious orders who have been with us for hundreds of years, because we have an ancient historical and deeply rooted Catholic culture. And we decided to be on the same page when it came to safeguarding policies. So all the religious orders on the islands and both dioceses, we're only two dioceses, have the same protocols. Cases are referred to the same head of safeguarding. Then he obviously relates to the different superiors and to different bishops because they are directly responsible. But there is a uniformity of policy. You understand that in a small society you need to act as one because the perception of people is that they are all men of God, or they have all the same commitment to the same gospel. I mean, I don't think we have a gospel for religious and a gospel for the diocese. I mean, some would like to think that that's the case, but I think that's an example where the ideal is actually working, and I think that is such a saving grace when in a nation, in a country, in a culture, you have the same protocols in place. So I would rather answer by quoting an example where this is working and working well. Sister.
Evelyn Finger decide.
Oh, okay.
And then Mariana Diaz.
I have a question to Evelyn Finger, the German Weekly Die Zeit. I have a question to Archbishop Scicluna on the presence of victims, because we see that one of the biggest organizations of them is holding speeches and demonstrations in front of the Vatican and also in front of the Castel Sant'Angelo. Why was it not possible to invite more people into the Vatican? This is 20 people from 20 countries, and you can feel when you listen to them how much they hope to be heard personally, and when they give their testimonies in a very professional way. I must say it's really heartbreaking to see that they don't get any direct response.
Yeah, in an ideal world that would have probably happened more, but we do have the voice of victims within the structure of our meeting. It was a meeting for church leadership, and there are also experiences like Cardinal Marx talked about his experience with a group of victims. The organizing committee on the eve of the meeting had a 2-hour meeting with 12 representatives from victims groups. Your point is a valid point, but even the decision of the Pope to invite everyone to listen to the victims at home before coming here means that we need to keep on listening. It's not a question of a 3-day event where everybody needs to be listened at the same time and in the same place. People will go home, and I hope that our attitude will remain that of listening to people, because listening to the narrative of victims is essential as a motivation for getting it right. If you don't listen to the narrative of victims, if you don't meet victims, you will never understand why you need to get it right. This has been my experience, and so your point is a valid point. The question of organization is what to and how to do it. In an ideal world, there may have been more opportunities, but there have been a number. I know that Cardinal Vincent also met a group of victims. Most of us were actually meeting victims during these days, outside the very tight schedule of the meeting itself. But this has to continue when we go home, because it is essential. So your point is a valid one, but it is not only something that we needed to do here and then forget about it. This has to be an essential element of our response. Listen to the victim, and you will understand that you need to get it right.
Diaz. And John.
Sì, salve, io sono...
Yes, Marina Diaz from Chile. A question for Monsignor Scicluna. I wanted to ask you, over these few days, we've been talking a great deal of concreteness and cooperating with the justice systems. I wanted to know whether your report, the report you worked on when you visited Chile last year, will that be sent to the authorities in Chile? We've asked for this question, but we haven't had an answer yet. First of all, I would like to thank the people of Chile for this experience. My first mission was exactly a year ago. A year ago, I left the San Carlos Hospital after an emergency surgery. That wasn't part of the mission. But then I had to spend a little more time there as a consequence because I couldn't catch a plane immediately, and we continued to work with Monsignor Jordi. But the people who gave us their trust decided to convey information directly to the Holy Father. We always respected this willingness, this desire they had, the request for confidentiality, and so the documentation that we collected was for the Pope and is available to the Holy Father. So there have been some requests for confidentiality, and I think that the Holy Father too needs to comply with them, because our mission on behalf of the Holy Father was to listen and report to the Pope. The decision is in his hands, but the people who spoke to us wanted to give this information directly to the Pope. So this indication was very clear from the start. This was documentation that was available to the Pope. The Pope believes, and I agree that he should respect the will of those who provided this documentation. So the documentation is available to the Pope, but it is the person who gives the information to the Pope who has to either give the same information to the authorities. They have a right to do this, but something that has been sent to the Pope in a context of confidentiality, it's important to respect this. So this is a matter of natural justice that needs to be respected.
Veronica, for a terrific speech. A question for Cardinal Marx and Archbishop Scicluna. It's clear in the last few days, including also from some of the questions in this hall, that there are tremendous expectations on the part of victims, especially in countries where civil justice has brought these cases forward. It's also clear that there are challenges in canon law and in somewhat of the attitude that the Vatican has had for a very long time. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that clash between expectations and what might be possible for the Vatican to do. If there's one message you wanted to give to victims in countries, and one about what you think they should understand about how the Vatican operates, and what you think the Holy Father himself and some in the Vatican should understand about the expectations in many countries, of victims in many countries. Thank you.
Ja, ich glaube, man muss die Verantwortung.
I think that the responsibilities need to be clarified. Already in the past, I had said to the Holy Father within the C9 group, the Holy See is not responsible for everything. Being an Archbishop of Munich and Freising, I'm responsible. We, as Episcopal Conference, are responsible in our country. And this is a responsibility which the Holy See cannot lift. And this is all motivated. If we look at the past, but also considering the future, I think that we do need binding guidelines for the entire Church, but they will then apply to individual cases. If we look at the countries participating here, we have a huge diversity, so we all need to accept our responsibilities. Now, as to the Holy See, we want to work with the civil justice, but there are also different standpoints in different countries. Not always democracy and the rule of law is applied. So at times it's even difficult to work with civil justice. There are no procedures that exclude civil justice. The ecclesiastic proceedings, civil proceedings, and naturally you have to involve both the Holy See and the civil justice system. And as to prevention, for example, in this field too, it is possible to cooperate. You know, for example, that in Munich, we work with the Center for Child Protection of the Gregorian University. In this case, too, we want to help working with civil bodies. It's essential to focus on responsibilities, but the Holy See needs to be vigilant and to ensure that in the Universal Church, within the Episcopal conferences, the points that are common to all, are shared by all, needs to be respected. This will make it possible for us to make process. There must be no cover-ups. There must be no exclusions in terms of working with civil justice, and these points need to be very clear to everyone. And so, Romeo from Raya, a question for Monsignor Scicluna, Cardinal Marx, or Father Lombardi, if they'd like to take the floor on the wake of what others have already said, but something more specific. Point 21, as regards the ones offered by Pope Francis, he talks about the need to set up a body that will be easily accessible to victims who wants to report specific crimes. So maybe can this body already be defined? What shape will it take on? Because not just you yesterday, but we, as journalists too, have been hearing terrible stories. And today we have, for example, the group of the ex-guests of the Provola Home for the Deaf and Dumb in Verona. We, the two, have presented personal letters to the Pope, letters to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, but we don't know what happened to all these requests, these letters. And another thing has to do with the management of declared paedophiles. Once you know that a priest is a paedophile, what should be done? If he has repented, how can you bring him back into a parish church or a community? Because psychologists say they can be treated, but they cannot be cured. As to the 21 points, very briefly, and then Father Lombardi, if I say something wrong, I'm sure you will correct me. The Holy Father has said from the start that he had read the papers, the documents, the reports of the Episcopal conferences, and I have summarized these indications in these 21 points. I'm giving them back to you. These are not formal decision, but these are points that the Pope wants us to discuss and develop. It's not the Holy See that can do this, it is the bishops' conferences that are to work on this, and the Holy See will monitor, possibly. And in the talks yesterday, and I said this to others, as to the letters I received, I have repeated this also in my report. Many victims feel abandoned, so they call, and then they are handed over to talk to somebody else, and then somebody else, and it's difficult to understand who is actually responsible. But if you are have been a victim, you find it very difficult. For example, in Germany, we shall be thinking and asking ourselves whether what we do is enough, or maybe we need to find new guidelines or new bodies which people can turn to if they are victims of sexual abuse. And the second point, I've forgotten it. Sorry. I'd like to add to what Cardinal Marx was saying. To my mind, it would be useful if every bishops' conference were to offer this service, not only at diocesan level, but throughout the country, a listening service. In Chile, for example, the bishops have set up this service, but it is managed by lay persons who are trusted, who are experts. So a point of reference where someone can report an abuse, can share a difficult story, somebody who needs to be supported. As to what the victims are saying, what happens is that unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, or sadly, the victim has a right to report an abuse, but there's no mechanism by which to inform victims about what has been done, because often there are legal proceedings or there's a trial, but the victims know nothing about it. Maybe at times they're called in to act as witnesses, but then they don't know what happens. Somebody will say, I received a report from a victim, the proceedings have been completed, the priest is no longer in the priesthood, and the victims know nothing about it. They continue to think that there was no follow-up on the report. Maybe there was, but what is lacking is the communication. At times, the same person is maybe reported again, but because is denounced again, but because there hasn't been the right communication, they don't know that this person is no longer a priest. Because, in fact, there had been proceedings as a result of a report. If there is a person who represents a risk to minors, then this person can no longer be part of in the ministry. It's not a question of where to place him, where to put him in. Simply can no longer be part of the ministry. This is point 14. Father Lombardi wanted to add something? This is very important. This has to do with transparency, how everything must be managed properly within the structure of the church. We need to continue to insist that the bishops' conferences have to have guidelines, and the guidelines must be public. They need to be on the websites of the bishops' conferences, and the guidelines are to state very clearly that in dioceses or in groups of dioceses, there has to be the listening service. It needs to be very clearly indicated who cases are to be reported to and where. And there has to be a committee responsible for listening and for also examining the allegation, because then the bishop will be required to intervene. These are all things that are extremely clear. They can already be very clear, but then one actually has to do these things. In Italy, we have 2 dioceses where things work well, Bolzano and Bergamo. The structure is very clearly defined, but this should be the case everywhere. If now the Italian Bishop Conference says that we'll provide a national service, then they have to make sure that it will be recognizable everywhere. The place where you report abuses is essential. It has to be the starting point, and transparency means not just describing an offense or saying what has happened. It means saying, this is how we are to proceed. These are the rules. These are the procedures. So you can report to these specific people. And then the accountability, responsibility follows. Just to share my own experience on this, the bishops want to know what to do because they want to do the right thing. I have been contacted by some of the bishops and they say to me, tell us exactly what we are to do. Because the congregation is preparing. We've reached the final draft of the document, and then it needs to be further studied and approved, a handbook that is accessible to the public. It will be public questions and answers. When you receive a report, what are you to do? What is to be reported to the Holy See? What types of cases? What information needs to be provided? How do the proceedings work? So very specific answers to very specific practical questions that can help our bishops, and this handbook will be available in the not too distant future.
Claudio Lavanga and Catherine Marciano. And stop, please.
Very much. This is Claudio Lavanga from NBC News. It's a question for Cardinal Marx. In your presentation this morning, you talked specifically about some documents that were destroyed, files that could have documented the terrible deeds and named those responsible were destroyed. I want to know more about that. I want to know what was in those documents, who destroyed them, and why, please. And is it still going on?
Ja, ich habe allgemein darüber berichtet.
I simply reported what has been found in the MHG study. This is what it's called in Germany. We had asked for this study as bishops. It hasn't been widely discussed, but I'll take advantage of your question just to explain briefly. The question we asked in 2012 or 2014 that then led to this study was the following. What are the systemic motivation? What are the dangers, systemic conditions that facilitate given abuses, and also make it easier not to report these abuses? Are there some specific dangers aside from the personal guilt of a perpetrator? There are some systemic problems that we need to be aware of. This was a very sensitive issue that was examined scientifically. We didn't name names. So this was a scientific study. We didn't talk about specific dioceses, although they all expressed their willingness to participate. This report that was published also in Italian and in English in a summary version, the study has indicated that in single dioceses, because we only examined dioceses and not orders or communities, the study indicates that some documents were manipulated or did not contain what they should have contained, but there are no specific responsibilities because this was a study that provided no names, but the fact in itself cannot be denied. As Munich diocese, this is what we found in our activities of the past 10 years. Clearly, also in relation to the guidelines that existed at the time, often it was not felt appropriate to keep specific information in the documents. For example, say a priest who comes from a different diocese and only exposes it, discovered that he had been accused of sexual abuse. That wasn't reported in the documents, however. Maybe the bishop had not been informed. For example, the bishop who had sent this priest elsewhere had not given the information. It says simply an ex post study that proves that we cannot keep going in the same manner. The cover-ups do not refer only to these sectors, and so simply I discuss this in my presentation. I say this openly. For years in our diocese, if somebody works with us as a priest, if he comes from a different country and is sent to us, I want all the documentation, the personal documentation concerning all of the activities of this person. And this seems obvious, but it hasn't always been the case. Sometimes superiors just said, oh, he's an excellent person, and that's it. But I want to see everything. I want to analyze everything. Simply to underline the changes that have been taking place.
AFP News Agency. Just a little follow-up to the last question to Cardinal Marx, and then a question to Sister Veronica. Did I understand correctly? You were referring to cases in Germany only, and do you think that such practices could have happened also inside Vatican dicasteries or in Vatican? And to Sister Veronica, I would like you to speak just a little bit about Africa and tell us why it's such a taboo to talk about sexual misconduct in Africa or in your country, and if people are in danger when they do so. Thank you.
Nein, ich habe mich natürlich nur auf das bezogen.
I can just say what I read personally, because everything else is just a hypothesis. So the only thing I can advise is to look at what they have. So re-examine all the documents they have, if this has not already been done, trying to understand and possibly trying to involve also civil justice if necessary. This has been my recommendation, but I have absolutely no information as to other cases. I had information concerning Germany, but I assume that Germany isn't just an isolated case.
A question. I want to say, I studied in the US. Secrecy and silence is not only in the African continent, it's everywhere, especially in sexual abuse cases. But in the US and many parts of Europe, you've been able to come out of that because people are able to talk openly. In the African continent, excuse me, there is still, in some parts, that secrecy. But when you have people working with individuals, like I worked for 9 years in that area, I heard so much. People are able to talk because they feel safe. And they feel what they have shared with you, if there's any help they can get, they will accept it. But there isn't much right now about making things public. Because for us, there is so much about protecting the individual, protecting the family, protecting the community. But then we are saying, and that's what I said in the hall, that we need to come out to the open. And it's already happening. not as much, but it's happening, that people have to come out to the open to speak. And if there are issues, we also talk about cultural aspect in terms of the African culture, that when you enter the seminary or the novitiate, you are not entering just as a person. Your family should be involved to know what that means, what the process is, what the stages are. If there are issues, the families, for us, should be involved because they have to know what their son or daughter did and why this is going to happen to him or her. How long will it take us to come out like you have in Europe and America? It will depend on what happens with these whole guidelines and things that will come out from this meeting. Because bishops, dioceses, and the group setup will have to do the follow-up with the person so that the person is protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Veronica. Thank you all. I remind you, no, it's possible for a reason of time to have individual interviews.
Oh.
So we see you tomorrow for the last briefing on the last day of the meeting. Thank you all.
Land of the free and the home of the brave. United States of America. Grounded in the conviction that all are endowed by their Creator to life, liberty, and the free expression of faith. A melting pot with immigrants and